All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Workflow Automation with Script Triggers. It's part of the intermediate track, so if you found your way into the room by accident, I encourage you to stay. I think there's a little bit of something here for everyone. My name is Todd Weller. I'm the Senior Data Systems Architect with Cross IT Services and Solutions. We're located in Greenville, Pennsylvania. If you were expecting someone a little shorter with a lot more hair, I'm the other Todd. So, okay. You can see some of my professional qualifications there on the screen. It's also in the DevCon to Go app, so I won't go into that. I will say this is my third or fourth time presenting at DevCon, depending on whether you count DevCons or actual sessions. Either way, I'm excited and honored by the opportunity to be back with you and to share today. So that's the professional me. The personal me, to put it simply, is a geek. I've collected comic books since high school and have about 4,000 at home. I've played trombone since high school or grade school and still play in a community band, like singing. I'm a roller coaster enthusiast. I've ridden 73 different roller coasters this year, a total of 180 times. And I think my lifetime count is now at 215 unique coasters ridden, so I like my roller coasters. And then I've recently taken up running, and I've done a couple half marathons and 5Ks and 10Ks along the way. So despite any similarities in appearance, I have never played a doctor on television. However, if you say, "Talk to me, Goose," in the hallway, I'll stop and talk to you. So there you go. Okay, so a few disclaimers as we move forward here. The first one is I'm going to be talking about that relationship between client and consultant, because, I mean, that's what Cross IT, that's what we do. For those of you that are in-house developers, I don't want you to feel slighted. I'm only doing that because what we all do is we use the FileMaker tool to solve problems for people and keep them happy. So rather than talking about your relationship as an in-house developer with your department or your entire company, we are all consultants, and whoever we're building the solution for is our client. So it just made the presentation easier. Also, do not be offended, but I'd like you to hold your questions until the end if you could, please. I've got a lot of prepared material to go through. We have, hopefully about half of our time will just be you getting to listen to me talk. Then I have some time for some demo, which I'm just going to go through the different examples, and if you want me to drill into the code at any point, we can circle back around that just to make sure we get through it. But you will have a demo file that you can go and pull all of these examples apart and look at them a little deeper. I was actually still tweaking it this morning, which is why it's not yet available from the community site, but it will be. And also, please use the microphone at the center when you do get to your questions. Finally, we're located in Western Pennsylvania. We have a lot of ways of saying things that are unique to our little corner of the country, and I don't want you to get lost. So if I say that yins need to do something, I'm referring to everybody in the room. It kind of looks like this, where we've got, that's where we're at. Okay, so enough about that. We can move on. So we're talking about workflow automation with script triggers, and what I wanted to do is actually break it down into its three components, simply because I want you to understand how I was approaching this topic, so that you understand how we're moving through the whole presentation, because the workflow, just general definition, is very broad. There's a lot of things that have workflow to them, not just things that we're building for FileMaker. And I think every presentation starts with something from dictionary.com. So I looked up the definition here, and workflow, to put it simply, is that flow or amount of work to or from an office, a department, or an employee. And let's see, if you go to any like Wikipedia, which I did, you'll also see that they're talking about the key concept of dealing with that orchestrated movement of the tasks and processes that you follow from start to finish. And I think if you look back at your experience, regardless of what workflow you were looking at, that's where you were at. You saw that there was a sequence of operations performed by an individual or a group to complete the task. So that's kind of like this generalized thing of workflow. It was kind of interesting, so we're going to get a little history lesson here. That workflow kind of started at the turn of the 20th century. had its origins in manufacturing, which should not be too surprising, because that was the time period as they were starting to modernize industry. They realized they needed to be able to focus in and just study that relational and rational organization of the work, because they realized as they were going through that, there we go, that they were able to improve their efficiency by understanding how the work was being completed. And if you have the part being made the same way every single time, you're able to improve the efficiency and thereby reduce costs. It also improved the quality for that very same reason. For a little trivia, workflow was actually first used in a railway journal back in 1921. So they were studying workflow even before it actually became an official thing. Now, of course, for us, we have to expand that definition of workflow because obviously that's in the physical space. We spend most of our time in that virtual space. And going back to dictionary.com, there's a expanded definition where it's that set of relationships between all the activities in a project, from start to finish. Those activities, they're related by different types of trigger relations, and these activities may be triggered by external events or by other activities. What's interesting about that definition, it brings into focus both the idea that there are events that are taking place and there's something that's causing us to move from step to step. I mean, they even use the word trigger in that definition, so that kind of helps us zero in on what our topic is here today, where we're talking about workflow automation with script triggers. I found an alternate definition, and I think this is kind of where most of us approach workflow, at least I do, when I'm thinking about FileMaker, is it's that movement of documents around an organization for any purpose. Whether you're getting a sign-off on a contract or doing a review of a product or an employee, you can see, and of course, we've got all the paperwork that has to go along with everything that's done. If you have ISO certification and things like that, that you can see these piles of paper moving from one person to another or one department to another. And so our job as developers typically in those situations is how can we move that information both electronically and then automatically to help people get their job done better. Another thing about workflow is that just like each custom app, the defined workflow is going to be unique. There are what I like to call macro level cases where you're looking at an entire, maybe company, maybe a department, where multiple people are touching the data along the way in the process, and so it's a very big setup. And when you get into like a micro level case, that would be where it's like one individual doing a single task, whether it's entering data or generating a report. You have there's benefits to automating that workflow as well. And of course, along with the micro level and the macro level, you also have to understand that you could be looking at the same task for two different companies or two different individuals that have the same start point and same end point, but the workflow is not going to be the same because what one person feels is the critical piece or that key component is going to be different for somebody else because you're dealing with different personalities and different perspectives. So even if you're building similar work, same start to finish, you have to understand that workflow, I can't just carbon copy it. And that's what's cool about the FileMaker platform is we have the flexibility to be able to adjust that workflow to fit and make sure that we're doing exactly what the end user needs. All right. From there, we have to figure out what the task is first. And for that macro level case, you might have to go talk to multiple people, observe the process, maybe even build some type of proof of concept model just to show them, hey, this is what's going on. For a micro level case where it's one individual, you just go down and talk to them for 10 minutes and say, yeah, I can do that. And you go and build and automate that workflow for them. Now, over the course of my career, as I've done these investigations, I've used pen and paper, I've used a whiteboard. With some of the newer software, you have like Balsamiq mockups, Lucid charts. So there's a lot of tools out there to gather that information and then start to plan what you're going to do. The idea is just you want to pick something that you're comfortable with using, but then also conveys to your client, okay, this is what I've understood that you've said to me, and this is how I'm going to build it, so that you can have that open exchange and make sure you're giving them what they really need. And now, of course, then once that the process is defined, then we are ready to then move on and build the solution. Okay, so after the workflow, we get to the automation. Now, again, like workflow, automation is a very broad topic. However, I think in this venue, I think you all think the same way that I do, that when you hear the word automation, you're automatically thinking, okay, I'm going to be writing FileMaker scripts, and I'm going to be spending time in the Script Workspace. So I'm not going to talk nearly as much about that as I just did on workflow, simply because I think everybody, regardless of whether you've been coding for a long time or just started, for the first solution you ever built, it didn't take you too long before you realized, hey, I need to automate some stuff. I'm tired of going over and clicking down here, pulling down the list, and going to my layout. I want to have a button. So you've written a script or done something to help you with that. So I think that's something that we all understand. Just, it was the next word in the line, so I had to talk about it. So there you go. All right, so that's automation. Now we get to script triggers. I could tell you that a script trigger is something that triggers a script and then move on, but that's almost as bad as saying that workflow is the flow of work from one person to another. So the best definition that I found in some of the FileMaker documentation is this. It says that a script trigger specifies that a script runs when a certain event occurs. And so what is that event? There's lots of things that do trigger scripts in FileMaker. You have buttons, you have menu items. Other scripts can also be a script trigger. However, those are those lowercase s and t script triggers that we're just going to set aside and not get into. What we're here to talk about is the defined script triggers that are the capital S and T as we think about it. So another quick history lesson. Just talking about script triggers. They were actually introduced with the release of FileMaker 10 back in January 2009. We started with 14 script triggers at that point, and then just like the continual improvements that they've made, we're now up to 25 script triggers at our disposal with FileMaker 16. And I only say that to tell you that there's a number of resources that are already available about script triggers if you need more information. So we're not going to dig into the minutia of each individual script trigger because of that reason. There have been a number of topics covered here at previous DevCons. You also have resources that are at the knowledge base at FileMaker.com that you can get into if you want to read more about a specific script trigger that you think may apply to your situation. And then also, of course, we have the resources of the FileMaker community. There's the resources area. So there's a lot of things out there. However, as I thought about it, there's still a few things that I want to, it's like broader things with script triggers I want to make sure that we all understand because they do come into play as you're building your automation. And the first thing we need to ask and then answer is, where do script triggers operate? They operate at the window level, the layout level, and the object level. So you're asking, okay, so why is that important? Well, you have to remember, we're taking workflow that exists in the physical space, and we're trying to identify, okay, what events are happening as this process moves from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. So we then need to be thinking about, okay, this is the physical event. What is the FileMaker event that I can then use to trigger the script? Is it whenever the user moves to a new record? Or is it when the user exits a specific field that I need to have something happen? So that's why you need to be conscious of where these script triggers operate. For those of you that have maybe never used a script trigger before and you're concerned that have been missing out, if you've ever done something on like the opening script, when you first open the file so that you get the user to the right layout, find a set of records, maybe set a few global fields, that was using a window level script trigger to do that. So you've already been doing it and you didn't even know, so you're fine. So don't worry about it. Okay, the next question that we had is we need to figure out, okay, when does the script run relative to this triggering event, regardless of what it is. Some script triggers, they run, or some scripts run before the event is processed. That you also have another group of script triggers that are after the event is processed. and the database engine sees the event and runs them at different times. So, and in those instances where the script trigger runs, or the script runs after, hang on, sorry about this. Go ahead and talk amongst yourselves here for a second. Is that for those pre-event or before processing script triggers, we have an extra level of control because we're able to then look at the event and then decide, do we want to allow that event to happen? We're able to cancel it and prevent the user from maybe going somewhere where he shouldn't go or doing something he shouldn't do. A quick example of this would be if you build a layout with a single field and you have an on-object enter and then an on-object exit script trigger. As you go into that field, whether by using your mouse or clicking in the tab order, the database engine is going to recognize that on-object enter event, and it's going to trigger the script, and the script is or the field itself is going to have focus while that script is running. That's one of those after processing, or what they call like the post-event script trigger, okay? Because the event has happened, and now we're running the script. Now on the flip side, whenever you're done and you want to then move out of that field, again, whether you use the mouse, tab, doesn't matter, it's going to recognize that on-object exit script trigger. So the database engine has acknowledged that the event is there, but it hasn't actually taken place yet. The field still has focus, the script runs, and if it returns a true result, then it allows the event to occur and we exit the field. If the event is false, then it cancels the action and that field that had focus retains focus. Now, that gives us a lot of power in our calculations, but I got to give you the Uncle Ben warning: with great power comes great responsibility. And I think you can understand the peril with that. What that means is that if you're going to write a script for one of those before processing or pre-event script triggers, you want to make sure that you have an exit condition defined. You don't want to get yourself stuck in a loop where you can't cancel out of it, okay? Now, luckily for us, this is one of the cases where the FileMaker database engine, as it's running, if it sees a null or empty script result, it's going to interpret it as a true for those cases where you've got the pre-event script triggers that has caused it. So that was very nice of them. The one helpful hint that I would say is that because of my CDO, it's like OCD except the letters are in alphabetical order, is that what you want to do is I explicitly declare all results when I'm writing a script for one of these before processing or pre-event script triggers, just so that when I come back in 6 months from now, a year from now, there's no uncertainty as to, okay, what's supposed to happen. I know that, okay, this is the true result, this is the false result, and there's no question. So just encourage you to do that. The other one is use FileMaker Pro Advanced, please. You arrived here, that was part of our registration. You have a license for FileMaker Pro Advanced. And what you get with Pro Advanced is Script Debugger. So you can turn that on as you begin testing your scripts and your script triggers and things like that. It allows you to step through the script one line at a time. You can skip steps if you need to. You can even cancel the script if necessary. So I use it all the time, and just going back and trying to develop without FileMaker Pro Advanced hurts my soul a little bit. So don't forget about that. So the third question that we want to answer is, what is the timing of the script triggers? Because there are certain things where if an event occurs, it could potentially trigger multiple things. Like a perfect example of this is when a file first opens, because of course you've got, it's opening a window, it's going to a default layout, it's loading a record, so what is all going to happen there? And so in those events, there's a relative order when those multiple script triggers are activated by the same event, and they could cause unexpected actions to occur if you're not planning for them. So just be aware of that. Now, obviously, this is dependent upon the complexity of your solution, where if you only have one script trigger defined, that's the only one that's going to happen. But if you have multiples, just be aware of that. And then there's another group of script triggers where the order is dependent on the triggering event. It's pretty much a which came first, and it processes that script trigger, and then it moves on to the next one. Okay, as I first started planning the session, I had 3 questions. Then I realized there was a 4th question that I should answer just to make sure that we all know what's going on. And because I'm such a nice guy, you get that question and answer at no additional charge. What that is what privileges does the script have when it runs? The short answer is it's going to have the same privileges that the user has who is logged into the system and has triggered that script. If you need to, if you've tightened that user's credentials to where they can only do certain things, and if they don't have the privileges to do what the script is calling them to do, it's probably going to fail. So you need to be aware of that, because that could, again, cause those unintended consequences with your data, where you leave the user, and those kinds of things. So you have 2 options. You either elevate that user's privileges, and change them so they could do that activity all of the time, or the simplest is you just define the script to run with full privileges when needed, and so that as soon as the script starts, he has full privileges, and then as soon as the script is over, then it reverts back to those regular privileges. That's typically what I do, but you have a couple options there. All right, now these next 3 slides, I'm only going to talk about long enough to get past them. And those are only there for your reference. I tried to take the answers to those 3 questions or the first 3 questions that we looked at, and kind of broke it down to where you could see where each script trigger falls as a reference, because I figured you guys are going to need something to do after the pool party tonight, so you can look at it all then. So there's that. Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to workflow, because understanding the workflow is the most important part. Now, and it's at this point, I'm no longer talking about that generalized concept of workflow. This is the actual specific workflow that you're trying to solve for your user to make their lives easier. And the best way to do that is to keep the user at the forefront, and take a page out of that user-centered design handbook, so that you know exactly what process you're building for to make their lives easier. So how does that happen? Well, it starts, again, we talked about observing the problem. I mean, that does not change as far as, other than maybe the tools that you like to use, but you want to observe the problem to be solved. Is it micro level? Is it macro level? What are we looking at here? And then you also have to be able to ask the right questions as you're doing this. The one thing I was told early on in my career in development is never ask the user what he needs to see, because he will tell you, especially if he is a manager, that you need to see everything. And that's usually not the case. Sometimes you just feel it's very busy layouts, and you can't find what you're actually looking for. So you want to be able to be sure that you're asking the right questions, like, okay, like what do you need to do, or what happens next? Because keep in mind, you're taking something that exists in the real world, translating into FileMaker so that it helps the user get done what needs to happen. Now, this next thing is the hardest part, is that you then need to listen to the answers. Okay, well, you've asked the questions, you need to then listen to the answers. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You've asked, your user, okay, you've asked them a question, and they start to give you the answer, and then immediately, I know sometimes my mind goes, okay, well, there's 5 ways in FileMaker that I can solve this problem right now. But the only problem is the user is still talking, and I just missed a crucial piece of information, and all of a sudden I've now gone down the wrong development path. And so then I have to circle back around because I didn't get it right the first time. So just make sure you're listening to understand and not just to give them an answer. Lastly, obviously the person that you're building the solution for is going to have, they know their business better than anybody else. However, we all have an expertise that we bring to the table as well. So you may have been on a different project or with a different company where you saw something similar, so you know what pitfalls there are. So go ahead and make suggestions, when possible, because that's going to make your development process, a little bit smoother because you have that experience. All right. Automating the wrong process is worse than having no process at all, or no automation at all. I'm going to say that again, and I'm going to say it right this time, is automating the wrong process is worse than having no automation at all. If you get nothing else, please remember that. Because nothing is worse than having a frustrated user because they want to click and have it do this, and they click and it does something else. So just, that's why it's so important to understand what the workflow and what the problem is that they're trying to solve. Okay. So then it comes time, this is where the rubber meets the road. We're programmers, we're ready to program, and so we want to take this workflow and start designing and building the solution. It could be brand new solution, it could be in addition to an existing solution, but this is where it gets exciting and we're ready to go. But I have a couple things I'd just like to share with you about that. The first one is to know the tools in your toolbox. What I mean by that is FileMaker as a company is constantly making improvements to the platform, and it could be a case where there's a new feature that all of a sudden it makes it easier to enact that particular workflow. So you want to understand, you don't need to understand everything, have it memorized 100%, but you do need to know what's possible, just so that you can say, yeah, I could do it this way, or I could do it that way. It's worth knowing those tools in your toolbox. The second one is that you want to make sure that you're making the technology serve the users. That's the beauty of the FileMaker platform. You can build solutions that work the way your users work, instead of them having this cookie cutter thing where they've got to try to redesign their processes to then fit into some off the shelf solution. So and that kind of goes back to this whole idea of the user-centered design. So make sure that you're doing the right thing the right way. Third thing is you want to build what the client needs, not what you like. Okay. Sometimes we find, oh, this is the newest feature, I can't wait to try it out. Oh, I'm going to try it out on them. But are they really going to benefit by you spending 4 or 5 hours to figure that out when a simple little 2-minute change from some old school method is going to work? Now that does seem to kind of contradict the first point. I will admit that. But what I'm trying to say though is that you have all of these tools, but don't forget about all the old ways if it's a good way to do it. Because if it's more complex, it may not work. However, if that more complex way is better, you certainly want to use it. So just keep that in mind. And again, it goes back, what's going to serve the user the best? And then finally, the cool thing about most FileMaker solutions is that you complete them and you hand them off to the client to use, but it's never really done. You can collect feedback, you can make continual improvements, so you always get to go back and talk to them and tweak things a little bit. There may be that new feature that all of a sudden, there was something that you had to do a workaround to make it work, and all of a sudden you have that new feature that you can then implement. It's also possible that their business rules that you are trying to program for have changed. It could be a government regulation or just something within the business that all of a sudden now that workflow has changed, and so you've got to update the process that are following, so you don't want to lose track of that. All right. So of course, our types of automation we talked about, they range from the simple to the complex. It could be simple little micro case, it could be a larger macro case. But you also want to keep in mind too that there's a balance between the time saved versus the time to develop, both for you as the developer and for the client. There are certain things that, if it's something that takes 5 minutes every 30 minutes and you can turn it into something that's an automated process that they never have to worry about, that's a huge time savings and everybody's happy because you're able to do it quickly. But there may be a process that's a yearly report that takes somebody half a day once a year. Do you really want to spend 2 weeks working on it? There's not going to be that potential payback both for you as a developer and for the client as well. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind. All right, so I have a few demos. I think I'm about right on time where I wanted to be here, halfway through. So as we get into some of those, these are methods and techniques that have served me well. It's not everything that is possible, of course. There's things that you can do with script triggers, to do like a perform script on server and do things like that. Perform script on server is complex enough that I didn't want to try to do anything with that other than to mention it, and then you can go look at some of the other resources because there are entire sessions devoted to that process if you need to crunch a lot of numbers and offload that process to the server rather than tying up the client's machine. So just understand that there are more things that you can do than just what I'm going to show you here today. And then, of course, my goal here is just to provide some inspiration into your own development so that you can go on to even bigger and better things than what you see here. So with that, we'll go ahead and switch over here. All right, so this is the demo file. Like I said, you all have a chance to take a look at. And the way I would like to work this, if it's okay with you guys, is that I'll just go through all of my examples and let you dig into the code on your own. And then once I get through everything, then we can circle back. And if there's like a specific thing that you want to see, okay, how did he do that? We can talk through it right here, or we can meet and talk offline. So the first thing is some simple layout redirection. It's not huge. It's definitely in that micro level case. But it helps your user because you're not putting them somewhere where they're like confused with where they want to be. This here is the the layout for desktop. If I switch over here and wake up my iPhone, there we go. Get into FileMaker Go. Sorry, I don't want to see your files. That's what happened. There we go. That looks better. Apparently the demo gods have smiled on me, so this is good. So we'll let that open there in the background. Okay, it's coming up. And so you can see we've got two different layouts for whether you're going in on a phone or whether you're going in on the desktop. A couple neat things that layout redirection allows you to do is that if I go into find mode here, I can, on that switch, I'm able to trigger the user to take them to a layout that's specific for finding things. That way they're not having to worry about the things that they're never going to search on anyway. So if I go in, do a and it brings me up a nice quick list view, and it takes me back to a good layout. Now if I do the same thing, and make the find a little bit more specific, what I'm able to do with the script triggers, and when it goes back into browse mode, it takes a quick peek at, okay, how many records are returned in the found set, because why would you want to look at one record in a list view? You're going to want to see it in the detail. So that's a nice way to help get the user where he needs to be, so he's immediately able to start using the data that he's found. More impressive if I do this. And this is something we do or I like to do in a lot of my solutions, is rather than allowing the user to print, it takes them to a preview page so they can see, okay, what am I about to print out and hand in to the boss or hand to the customer or whatever the case might be. And they're looking at it, so I got to make some changes, so I'm going to exit preview, and of course it goes into out of preview mode, but you're now in browse mode and it doesn't really look like anything. So I'm going to go back into preview here, and what I've done is I've tied in a script trigger on a custom menu based on the name. So now when I exit the preview, it knows, okay, just go ahead and close the window and get me back so I can make that adjustment before I go to try to preview it again. So it's a very simple thing, but it's very helpful for the user from that perspective. A couple other things that you're able to do. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new record here. Okay, I hate that. I'm sure you do too, because as soon as you start, when you expect a single value and somebody puts in a carriage return, the data conformity is off and nobody's happy. It's like, why is this random record over here and not showing up on the report? So of course, there is the way to change it where you adjust the behavior of the field. So now when I hit the return key, it takes me to the next field. So that's an easy way to avoid having them enter that in. However, the problem with that is it discourages the user because it's not acting the way that they want. Because if I wanted to go in here and find my email, I would just want to hit return. And of course it works. Okay. But there are certain cases where you go to hit the return key and it actually takes you forward rather than actually executing the find. So what we've done here is, and what you're looking at here is actually a layout that's got fields layered on top of each other, and I'm just changing the value of a global field to make them visible or not visible to us. So these are the ones here that have some script triggers on them. And what that does is it then allows me to begin to type. And I'm just going to. But now when I hit the return key, it's not letting anything happen. It's just leaving me on that field because it's using one of those pre-event script triggers. It said, oh, you've hit the return. Now, I'm going to capture that character, look at it, say, I'm sorry, that character's not allowed, and I'm going to cancel the event that's going to exit the field. All right, so again, very simple thing, but it definitely helps out both the users and you if you're trying to manage that data. Another thing that we have here is that maybe you want to lock the condition of the record so that there's no possible changes that you don't want the user to confirm, because by default FileMaker is going to save those changes. So what I've done here is on this layout, as soon as the record loads, it's gathering what I've identified as that key information, storing it into a series of globals, and then as soon as I type in, you'll notice that the screen, the button's changed, and so now I either have to submit my changes or cancel them. So if I do something like that and realize, no, that's not what I want to do, it reverts everything back through, there's just the button runs one script, but then there's another script trigger that runs as you enter into those objects. Now I'm doing it on object enter. You could certainly do it, pick a different script trigger so that maybe it only activates that, and hides those buttons if they've actually made a change in the field. It's just, kind of a preference thing there. Now, the one cool thing is you'll notice that, because I'm geeky enough, I have to catalog all of my comic book covers too, so I know which issue I'm talking about, is if someone comes in and if I, accidentally replace, okay, now obviously that's not the one that I wanted. Wouldn't it be great if I could just hit cancel and put that back? So that's kind of a cool thing where we're actually using like an a hash to store that in also store that glob into a variable, and then we're able to put it back in. So I thought that was kind of a a neat thing that you're able to do to prevent those users from messing up as they're doing data entry. All right. The next one that I'd like to show here is one that I would love to take complete credit for, but I just looked over Albert's from Smallco's shoulder as he was helping me work on this. And what that is it's like a text, a dynamic search. It's similar to the quick find. I will give you that, but we find it gives it a little bit more flexibility, simply because as you type, it starts to filter your list, but then when you backspace, it restores what you were looking at before. And then right now this particular script is set up to trigger that search and constrain. Each time you type a letter, it will also go up to 3 words. So if I wanted to narrow it down even more, as soon as I get to the second word, now I've quickly found and narrowed it down to just those few records. And again, as I go to type back, it's starting to regenerate that script trigger. And what it is, it's on object keystroke. it runs the script, and then it puts you back into that filter text field so that you're able to then go ahead and receive that next keystroke. So, very good stuff. The next one is back on my iPhone here. So let me wake it back up. And what that is we had built an inventory scanning solution for a company that needed to do a physical inventory. They wanted to be walked through their warehouse and scan each barcode. And typically when you're inserting from device, you've got to tap on the field, hold the camera up, it scans it, then you tap and do it again. So we were looking for a way where we were able to automate that. But this was one of those cases where the script debugger and FileMaker Pro Advanced saved me because I was trying to use on-object modify, and it put me into like an endless loop because I never actually exited the first script before I was trying to get back into the field to trigger the next scan of the barcode. So just real quick, we'll say we're here, and I'm just going to go row 1 just to get that information in. And now I'm ready to scan inventory. So I've gone into the scan mode. I'm going to go over here. I've got a list of barcodes. Okay, and then when I hit cancel, it says you've scanned these many. Go ahead and process that. And then it takes that glob of numbers that we've scanned and starts dumping them into a nice list view here that we can say, okay, this is what was scanned versus what we've said that is in inventory. And the way that we were able to get around that is we were able to use a tangential script trigger. Like I said, we weren't going to get into perform script on server and some of the things you can do with geofencing and iBeacons. But what I found was that the secret is that when you go back to the on-object modify, which was what I was using whenever the field got dropped in, is it actually set up an on-timer script that had a delay of 1/4 of a second. So I was able to exit get into the field, have the script exit, and then I was ready to start receiving and waiting for that next scan. So that was another thing that was a huge time savings because they didn't have to keep tabbing into that field to bring up the camera and to be able to scan. Now my final demo is one that requires the file to be hosted on server. So what I did is I actually took a video of me doing that this morning so that we didn't have to rely on the network connection and whether it was going to work or not. So I'll just kind of talk through it as we're looking. And what this example here is that we are building an order, and we'll go through and it begins to fill out the information here, of course who the bill to, the address is, this is a case where we assume the customer has called into like a customer service representative and they're getting the information and what this particular person needs, getting PO number, putting in what they know are the regular terms for their company. So I was typing slow this morning, so. And add a few line items here to this particular order. Now the order is not going to be complete because this is a place where the company's workflow was that okay, anybody can take an order, but the account executive has to sign off on it. So that's what's going to happen. You'll notice that we have they're receiving the order intake here. And then he's going to go up and, okay, everything looks good. And I'm going to go ahead and set this status as, go ahead, move faster, as that this order has been requested for shipment. And what that's going to do is that's then going to trigger an email that's going to go out to the account executive, say, hey, we just received this new order. We need you to take a look at it. But instead of sending it as just pure text in an email or as a PDF, we're actually including a snapshot link to the email. And I sent all these emails to myself just for the sake of ease here. So the email came in. Now we're going to go ahead and switch over. There you can see the emails in my inbox. Just not that you wouldn't believe me, but I just wanted you to believe me. All right, so then we open up the email here. We go back into that order. Again, the snapshot link is attached at the bottom. And now instead of having to go into the record or go into the solution, find that customer or find that particular order number, that account executive whose time is valuable was just able to click on the snapshot link, and it drops him right into a layout that was optimized for viewing on the iPhone. And then he's able to go in and review the information and say, okay, yeah, that's where the customer always wants their stuff shipped to. And do any changes need to be made as he's looking at it here. Which I know there are changes. There we go. Now for this particular client, we realized that probably net 30 is a little bit too long given his history, so we want to make him pay in 15 days, okay? Also, we're going to go down here and say, well, he's ordering 7 of these, I'm going to give him a little bit of a price break. So that gives that account executive the ability to preview the order and customize it because he's had whatever previous relationship or his dealings with that customer. And then once he's done, he can say, okay, let's go ahead and update that price. Okay, so it's been reviewed. Go ahead and change the status. And then what that's going to do is that then triggers another email, this time with a PDF, to go back to the shipping department so they can start pulling those items out of inventory, get it ready for shipment. All right, and there's the email hitting the inbox again. So now we switch back to what we assume is probably a desktop for that shipping supervisor. He goes in, he looks at the email. I apologize. It looked like I was going really fast this morning when I did this. And so then now we have this custom pick slip for that order. You'll notice that the warehouse guys aren't going to be worried about what the prices are. They just want to know, okay, what are the weights and the total so that we don't overload the truck. So they have that. They can pull it, print it out, or just carry it with them, go out through the warehouse and start building the order. Then once the order is then complete, he's able to go back, update information, because obviously the trucking company was unknown at the time. He didn't know what the shipment terms were. So he's able to go back in to our solution, go ahead and make those couple updates. Get our carrier in there. And with that, the truck is on its way, and he's able to go up and then mark the order shipped. Okay, come on. And with that, it now generates an invoice, which is then, instead of keeping internal to the company, this particular one is actually being sent directly to the customer, so then he's able to pay. Obviously, like I have this screen popping up here just so that you can see that things are happening in the background. You can certainly do things to move that window off screen, so the user, it's still happening, but he doesn't necessarily see it pop up. That's just, a preference choice there. And we come back, we see now we've got, the ship date has been filled in as part of that script running, and we're able to go in and then look at the invoice, and I can go ahead and submit my payment. And obviously, again, it's a different format. It includes, the pricing and everything that they would need as, the end customer. All right. So with that, I believe we are just about out of time. So I was hoping to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. So if any of you have questions, now's your chance. if you'd like to, and if your question is something you'd like to drill in a little bit deeper, I'd be more than happy to talk to you offline.
I just had a quick question. You mentioned the relative order for script triggers. Is that posted anywhere?
Yeah, it is in the, I think the script, I believe it's in the I can't remember if it's in the script reference. I know I definitely got it off of the FileMaker 16 help, but it is also listed on the one slide there that we kind of just blew past as far as like the relative order. So you can definitely find it there.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. As I mentioned at the beginning, this session will have updates. I've made a few tweaks to the slides, as well as I'll add the demo file that you can. There's no password on it, so you can just open it up and tear it apart if you find that helpful. All right. With that, thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it. Oh, and please do remember to fill out your evaluation.